Hey, Zaka family. Zaka is launching an exclusive membership platform to provide you with career development workshops, coaching, community, and so much more. Go to ZakaConnect.com and sign up to receive information on how to access early registration and perks. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Allison Brunez, who is an associate of content at the Content Collective. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Excited.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours, right? And also mine as well. So I love what I've read about your bio and some things about you. And I'm looking forward to, engaging in conversation this evening with you. But before we dive into a little bit more about what you do currently and like how your journey started off, but just give us a little bit background of your culture background and where you're from and where your family's from.
Yeah. I currently reside in LA. My parents, I was born and raised in the Bay Area. And my parents immigrated here in 1988 from the Philippines. So my mom is from Olongapo City in the Philippines, and my dad is in Manila. A lot of my mom's family is in California now. And then a lot of my dad's family is still in the Philippines. So I still have a lot of roots that run deep in the Philippines. And yeah, I would say I grew up very traditionally Filipino. I think, there was always a struggle of my parents like trying to make sure that we were assimilated with American culture and that, we felt comfortable, but then also, at home they were speaking the language to us. We were eating Filipino food to this day. My mom still cooks Filipino food when we come. So it is, I would say I'm a proud Filipino American.
Okay. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about the Philippines for our listeners?
Yeah. The Philippines, to be honest, I didn't grow up with a lot of history for like knowing a lot of history about the Philippines. And when I went to college at University of Manoa in Hawaii, they had Filipino studies, which is like one of the few universities that teaches history on the Philippines and Filipino culture. And so I learned a lot of my history later in life. For the Philippines is a culmination of islands, and a lot of the history is, a lot of people call us kind of like a mixing pot because we were colonized by a lot of different groups, and so we are a little mix of everything. Which is, I think that has great influences on food and our culture, and there's a lot of similarities even with languages like Spanish. There's a lot of language similarities. So we are a melting pot, but I would say Filipinos are unique and Filipino culture is so unique, but there's a lot of similarities across the other Asian communities. So yeah, that's very top line of the Philippine culture, but there's so much to dig into there.
Got you. No, that was good right there. A little base for us. What does your culture mean to you, and like how does it operate, or how do you utilize it when you're at work?
Yeah, I would say at work, especially like, I work on the corporate side now. And so I'm very aware that in a lot of cases, I'm one of the few women in the room, and then let alone brown women in the room, let alone the only Filipino woman in the room. And so I'm hyper aware when I walk into a room or I enter a call of like who I am in that space and who I'm representing. And so I'm always thinking about, like when when I'm looking at pieces of content or when we're evaluating content and, who we're trying to hit for brands, I'm always asking the questions of, is this authentic to this community? Are we speaking in the right way? Are we being inclusive? All of these questions, I think, are top of mind just constantly, whether it's, a work project or even when we're just talking casually at work about inclusivity and what people are looking for around content and keeping my ear to the ground with culture. So I think a lot of that is top of mind because of who I am and where I come from. I'm just like very hyper aware of making sure that the stuff that I'm putting out and the projects that I'm working on are representative of who I am and my culture and what I want to see.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say about your culture, and you talked about a little bit of your life right there, could you tell us a little bit more about your upbringing? What were some of the challenges, you kind of faced, along your journey, whether it be in school, especially in the beginning in school and before you felt comfortable with the goals you set forth?
Yeah. I would say, I grew up I grew up very privileged, and I will say that I owe everything to my parents. They worked really hard when they immigrated here to ensure that we were set up for success in what they deemed as successful. And to them, that meant putting us in the best schools possible. And so I grew up in private school where I was, I had to we had to work for it. We weren't handed it. I was in financial aid. I'm very transparent about that. Like I was, in high school, I was attending classes alongside these folks that, are maybe legacy students who their whole family went to these private schools. And I was, helping serve lunch, and I was volunteering for school events to ensure that our tuition could be paid for. And that is truly a testament of what my parents were trying to do and like setting us up for success. But that also came with challenges, going to a private school, coming from parents of immigrants, being first generation. I think I was just very aware of who I was surrounded with and what a blessing it was to be in that space. And so I think a lot of the challenges were like I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me at my school, and even in the corporate side. Unfortunately, as I'm moving up in my career, I'm seeing less and less of people that look like me. And that obviously, is there are slight microaggressions here and there where just people would not understand or pick up on them unless you are in a position like me. So I grew up in a predominantly white private school.
Mm-hmm.
And that has its challenges, but
Yeah.
I was very aware of that, and I found my community and I found my activities within that school, and it ended up being a great experience, once you find your tribe. And I stuck with them. I think we really bonded over what it was like going through school like that. And I enjoyed my time, and I think that not a lot of people can say that, but I, worked my ass off, and I guess here I am.
Now, when you were talking about high school, like what were some of your goals in high school? Like, how did you get involved in content? Was it only when you got to college, or was it something you started to have an interest in when you were in high school?
Funnily enough, I thought I was going to be I was like in middle school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I found out quickly that that was not where I wanted to head. And then I thought I wanted to do marriage family therapy for a little bit. And then I realized, out of high school, I think I was still a little bit confused. And then going into college, there's that moment where you need to pick a major.
Yes, that's that moment right there where everyone kind of dreads. They're like,
Yeah,
"Oh no,
there it is. And I was
no more fun and games."
yeah, that was really a reality check there. But I would say, I put a lot of pressure on that moment, and I was like, okay, this is it. Like whatever I choose, this is my path. When in reality, I think that, I think now with the times, especially with formal college education not being like a red flag for companies, I think a lot more people are lenient into like hiring more Gen Z or people that are still even in school. So I think there's a little bit more leeway there. But at the time when I was picking a major, I was like, this is the end all be all. So I really evaluated, and I was like, okay, I'm going to choose something that I want to learn more about and I'm interested in about. And at that time, I came to the conclusion, I was like, I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by how people interact. I'm fascinated by social institutions. and how people, work together in a community. And that's how I landed on sociology. And so it was really like the study of people and how people interact, and studying social institutions. And I don't have one regret about it. I think that led me into realizing like I'm just fascinated about how people work. And I think that really led me naturally to marketing, advertising, content, just like the more creative side, and like seeing how we can tap into those human desires of like, wanting to watch content that resonates with us and that is authentic and isn't forced and doesn't feel overly commercialized. Like that is what I am interested in doing. And I have been blessed enough to land a job that does exactly that. So I'm hyper focused on content and content partnerships and brand partnerships. So that's kind of how I stumbled my way in here.
And I'm glad we're actually having this conversation. I know a lot of the individuals the listeners that are checking in, a lot of them may have access to their own social media platforms or looking to create content that's going to be engaging, but sometimes people just don't even know where to start, how to start. Do you feel like your college career kind of helps you with that in regards to kind of figuring out like how to really like sharpen those tools? And like also like when you got out of college, like what were like some of the first companies that you worked for?
Yeah. I mean, I would say like in college, I think a lot of what I learned in undergrad studying sociology is directly related to what I'm doing now. And there have even been times that I have referred to referred back to some of my studies when I'm looking at trends or what people are drawn to. So I would say I definitely still look back on some of my studies, and it's still I would say right out of college, the only experience I had right out of college was working at this small tech company.
Doing content?
No, it was project management. So
okay.
And that was
switch up.
Yeah, that was because during college, I had a limited time to work, so it was very flexible. It was basically on campus. So it was convenience, it was easy, and I felt like project management was a skill that could be transferable across different industries. So that was my thought process for when I was looking for a college job. When I got out of college, I was living in the Bay Area, and I wanted to basically move to LA. And so I made the jump to LA. I already had my brother was already down there. So I moved in with him for a little bit. When I was in LA in the beginning, I didn't have a job for maybe 3 months. I was like looking, but I was already in LA, so I was very committed to it. And then I landed my job at Red Bull, where I was working on social media strategy and programming. And I worked my way up at Red Bull. I started in a very administrative role, and then I moved into more of a strategic role, and I helped them build out, their TikTok strategy when TikTok was kind of ramping up. So I was just very fortunate to find people that, believed in me, was willing to mentor me. And to this day, I still consider them, mentors in my career. So I think a lot of it had to do with, I was hustling to get there, but then also I'm very aware that there are just some people that took a chance on me. And I was just very persistent about asking for that mentorship and asking for that leadership to help me get to the next level. So I'm forever grateful for the mentors that I made early on in my career.
I'm glad you're hitting on the whole thing about mentors. I feel like a lot of the guests that we have had on the show highly encourage the whole thing about mentors, especially when you're coming up in your career path, when you feel like you kind of like have ownership of like what you really want to do. Like having people who have gone before you in some capacity is always good to have. Now, I know you mentioned the word TikTok. Obviously, I know what TikTok is, but some of our listeners might not know, right? So could you explain like TikTok to us, and like how valuable is TikTok when it comes to like, content, partnership?
Yeah. Oh boy, you just opened a can of worms. I love TikTok. I Yeah, it's basically like a short form social media platform. Um, Basically, like, I know more people are familiar with Instagram, but it's similar to Instagram Reels, but I think it is similar to Instagram Reels, but on steroids. So it's, a little bit more, a little less polished than Instagram. And by a little, I mean a lot less polished than Instagram. It's very creator driven. So I think what's great about TikTok is the tools that they have in app. It's just so easy to edit and add sound and, the things that are typically difficult for people to get started in making content. It's usually those barriers of, oh, I don't know how to film, or, oh, I don't know what sound to use. I don't know what to create. TikTok has answers a lot of those questions. They make it so easy for you to edit in the app. So you don't leave the app. It's very easy. There's so many content ideas because there's trends that are happening every day that are changing. There are different disciplines on there, so the algorithm really caters to what you're interested in and what you like watching. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's just like such an innovative platform. And a lot of early on in my career, when I was first at Red Bull, a lot of my job was just convincing people in the corporate side that are traditionally used to traditional paid advertising, or
Print ads and
yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
with Facebook, Instagram, linear spots. That's what they were used to. But it was a lot of my job was convincing people the impact of TikTok and how it was going to shake things up. And it absolutely did. Instagram is, shifting to be more short form video focused. Longer form pieces of content, even on YouTube, people are doing less than 5 minutes. It's like the path of content is changing to be shorter, more authentic, less brand forward, so less commercialized, and like really providing value to people. So like, what story are you telling? How are you telling it? And why does it matter to me? So that is so much more important. And I think people are being a lot more precious about their time and what they're watching. So um I love TikTok. I think that the longer that you're on there, the algorithm just changes to what you like to see. So,
True.
me being on TikTok a lot now, like every video I'm seeing is hilarious or useful or being liked or saved. So, I'm a big fan of
Hmm.
TikTok.
It's good to have, I like the fact that you did give, a little credit to Instagram. I feel like, and you could let us know, because you obviously have a lot more insight on it, like having several different forms of platforms to utilize to kind of put your stuff out there. Do you feel like that's a great thing, or should people just kind of cater towards one?
Yeah, I would say hit it all. I mean, if you're already doing it and your goal is to get eyes on what you're doing, which is, most people's goals, like they want to show what they're doing and share it with their community. I would say, hit it all if you have the bandwidth. The only caveat I would say is just make sure you are customizing what you're putting out on each platform. So, like what you're putting on TikTok is not going to be the same thing that you should be putting on Instagram. TikTok should, be a little less polished. It should really show your personality. I think in all cases, it should show your personality. But I think, traditionally, Instagram is a little bit more premium. I think
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
start to go away from that. But I think TikTok is really where you get the opportunity to show almost the behind the scenes of what's going on. And really like using it super casually. I think sometimes people think overthink it. But I think at the end of the day, if what you're trying to do is show your community what you're doing, then I would say speak to each audience on each platform differently. In the same way that like when you're interacting with content on different platforms, you're interacting with it differently. So you should do the same when you're posting, because that is what people expect and what people want to see. They go to different platforms for different things.
Now, with that being said, I know that you work with, some very large brands. I mean, you mentioned Red Bull, which is a big brand right there. Could you talk to us a little bit more about like what did you see when it came to diversity and inclusion? I know you talked about, you walking into the room and, you were the only brown individual in the room, or more, also the only Filipino in the room. Could you talk a little bit more about diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. Diversity and inclusion is obviously something that I'm super passionate about. And, um, when Red Bull is traditionally sports media just in general. Red Bull does sports media and it's traditionally very male dominated. And, not a lot of people that look like me in the rooms. And so I I would say at Red Bull is kind of when I realized that that was a passion point of mine. I was like, "Oh, I'm I didn't realize how much I did not like being the only person in the room that looked like this." Or I almost felt like it was a burden to to speak to speak up in spaces like that because I felt like the responsibility fell on me every time. So like when you look in the room and there's not a lot of people who look like you, yes, I think part of it is, my duty to speak up and say when I'm not vibing with something, or if somebody says something that's a little off-putting. But to a certain point, I think at the end of my time at Red Bull, I was like, it's almost exhausting to have to feel like I have to speak up every time because nobody else is going to, because nobody else has that struggle, right? And so I think at Red Bull was when I realized that that was a passion point of mine. And so after Red Bull, I really was intentional in my interviews about looking for a place or company to go to that aligned with my values personally. And I think, in my first job, I was just like, what is the best and biggest job that I can land, right? Like that's
True.
really the goal when you get out of college. Like
True. You're trying to pay back that loan, so
yeah,
you
I was like,
yeah,
I was like, I am a broke college student. I need some money. So my energy was a little bit different, but after I had gotten some work experience and I realized what made me happy, which was making sure that the brand or company that I was working for and the leaders that I was working for was aligned with my personal goals. So I felt good about going to work every day and really hustling for, like I want to hustle for people that are aligned with me. And so my next jobs after Red Bull were, I feel like, very aligned with what I was looking for, both personally and professionally.
Okay, okay. And I think that's something that everyone can learn from. Is like you said, graduating from college, you might not think about those things right up front, but like as you start to grow through your company, through corporate America, or just in your passion in general, like you want to find more individuals like yourself, as you climb that ladder. And I know it must have been a lot of pressure in a sense to kind of walk into that room and feel like, okay, are they going to accept me, or are they going to listen to me? Being a woman as well too, like there was a lot of things that probably went in, but you obviously went in there with flying colors and did your thing, and that's why you kept on climbing that ladder. Now, who motivated you or influenced you to working on brand content and advertising?
I mean, obviously my family, like I think everything I do, the underlying motivation is my family. When my parents immigrated here, they had big dreams and big hopes for us. And so the best that I can do, which is not enough, but the best that I can do is make sure that the life that I am living is aligned with my personal goals, makes me happy, and does them proud. And so like that is, the base motivation for everything I do. Um, and then, like I mentioned, the mentors that I have really given it to me straight. And I think that is what I needed. Like I didn't need somebody to handhold me. I needed somebody that was going to tell me what it was going to take as a woman in color in the corporate world. Like I really found mentors who believed in me, even people like recruiters. Like when, you're looking for a job, you really need to find people that are going to vouch for you and that are going to advocate for you, and a community that you can lean on. Like I still talk to former colleagues and former bosses and former mentors and really pick their brains or ask them for advice. And I think the best that we can do is lift up our community and lean on our community. And that is, I would say my family and my community has really gotten me to where I am today. So, all thanks to them, really.
It's always essential to have like a selected group of people around you, to kind of help you, especially navigate through all the goods and the bads, when you're obviously climbing that ladder. Now, I know you're working now for an agency, Content
Yeah.
Collective. What's like the biggest difference, working on one brand as opposed to like working in an agency?
Yeah. It's very different. So after Red Bull, I moved to like the publisher side at Tastemade. And then now I'm on the agency side. So I've kind of made my way all around. I really wanted to get like a holistic picture of how content gets created. Like, I really wanted to see it all. And now on the agency side, it's very interesting because it's almost like an in-between of like the brand side, the publisher side. Like you're working with multiple brands. So I'm working, with at the moment 3 brands. And each brand speaks differently. Each brand has different audiences. They show up in different places, different networks, different publishers. And so I would say it's definitely a lot more challenging in that you have to be well versed on 3 brands versus, obviously only having to work on one brand and like being the expert in that field. I think in this case, it's a little bit more challenging because you need to be an expert in your field across 3 industries. Like the 3 brands I work on are completely different. Like they're not even related at all. And so that has been a challenge, but in the best way. After Tastemade, I was looking for something that would challenge me and would teach me something. And I would say I am only a couple months in. I think I'm like 6 months in in the agency side. And to this, I mean, I'm still constantly learning. I'm learning so much from my executives, my directors, and they are like who I am looking to be as a leader. And so I'm just learning. I'm keeping my head down. I'm hustling. I'm feeling very empowered in this role. And so it's different. It's faster paced. It's a lot, but that's what I asked for. So
True, true, true. The agency life is definitely like that. Moving from one brand to the next, contacting people. I could only imagine what the office looks like. It's and someone like yourself, you seem very animated. So I know that energy is definitely felt in that office. I know. Now you're doing, currently doing, content marketing for several brands. Can you explain, like, to the audience about like your role and some of those obstacles you might face, like on a daily basis when it comes to creating?
yeah. Yeah, so the brands I'm working on right now are Home Depot, Ancestry, and Bacardi. And Bacardi's inclusive of like Grey Goose, Bombay Sapphire, like all of those spirits. Um, and I would say my day-to-day kind of shifts, but essentially like we are hyper focused on content, custom content partnerships, and brand partnerships. So a lot of my job is looking at, the landscape and seeing what partners and networks make sense for the brands that I work on. So, if the brand has a new campaign, the holidays are coming up. So if they want to focus, if they have a new mission for the holidays, and maybe that is to sell a certain type of cocktail, instead of focusing on traditional ads and advertising and commercial, my job is to focus on how do we create custom content around that is authentic and it makes sense and it isn't over commercialized, but it still gives our viewers the sentiment of, wow, I really like what that brand is aligned with and I want to drink that drink. So it's almost like inviting them to be a part of the community without being like, hey,
In your face. Yeah, in your face type of marketing.
yeah. So a lot of it is, it's content partnerships, it's seeing it's like evaluating pitches from some networks and other publishers. They're pitching us ideas, we're evaluating them, we're presenting them to the brand, and if they like them, then we're carrying it out. Like we're on set, we're making sure that it's being executed right. We're across all the post production, making sure that all the cuts are what we're looking for, that it's not overly branded, but it's not, making sure that there's still enough branding. So it's finding that fine line, and it's using data, but it's also using your gut for like what you
Yeah.
content and where you think it'll land, and keeping your ear to the ground on trends.
I could only imagine like you glued to your phone at that point, seeing like the latest trends, seeing what's going on, looking at other companies' pages to kind of see what's working with them and what's not working for them. Is that something that happens on a day-to-day?
Oh yeah, I am on. I think I've been watching a lot more TVs and movies and social media way more now being in this role, like because people are constantly talking about the new shows that are out and how can you create content around those shows and how do you talk about those shows. And so it's like, I think I moved away from watching like TV and all of that, but with this role I really need to be like in the weeds. So we're talking about like what's new on NBC or what's new on A&E. Like we're looking at like these networks and evaluating these shows and movies for these brands, but you can't do that unless you're watching the shows or what it's about. So
True.
I've had to dig in and like try to catch myself up, but it's fun stuff. I can't complain. Like I'm on my phone, I'm watching YouTube. It's all
I know, right? When people crunch the numbers, you out here watching YouTube. Granted, it is still work, right? So you talked about you're smiling and stuff like that. You're talking about watching while you're looking at these things. Like, what makes you happy in your line of work?
I mean, I just I have a really good friend that puts this very eloquently. She's like, at the end of the day, what we're working on is pixels on a screen. And so when she puts it like that, it really makes me present to the fact that what we're working on is fun stuff. Like, yes, it does get, sometimes stressful with deadlines or with clients or partners. Like, yeah, sometimes the day-to-day gets stressful, but what really grounds me and, makes me come back to a state of gratitude is the fact that what I'm doing is working on content, which is very exciting. Like it's very like what a blessing it is to be able to do that as a full-time job and like have brands that really lean on me for my expertise in that world. And that's really exciting. And I have, even early on in my career, I always said I wanted to be a decision maker. I wanted to make change and I wanted to feel empowered to use my voice. And in this space, I am given that. And we're talking about something like content that's like on social media or on streaming networks. And that just makes me so happy that I get to do that in such a fun way for my full-time job. So I am, forever grateful, but it just makes me happy knowing that like this is what I get to do and I get to do it with some really cool people and learn from really cool people. So yeah,
that sounds fun already. It seems like every day is a little bit different. There's no day is the same from what I'm hearing right now. Like just being able to kind of like go work on this trend, work on this content, work on, you're working with several different people, different departments. So I feel like with change and like that type of pace, keeps someone, on their toes, more importantly, motivated and possibly happy. Because once you start doing the same thing over and over, you start saying to yourself, like, why am I really here? But just hearing you speaking of your company and the agency and the work that you do, you could hear it, that you're very vibrant about it. So you've definitely found the place to be. Now, when I was looking at your bio, I know you're very fascinated with like trends and like authenticity. Like, could you tell us a little bit more about like how does that intrigue you? Like, I know you talked about your the first thing you kind of talked about was like the culture and like you wanted to fit you mentioned right at the top of the whole interview, you talked about like how you want the content to kind of be authentic and fit like what fits in your culture in a sense. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I think trends, I think that kind of stems from like the whole TikTok movement. I think just I'm fascinated with how trends move, how trends start, where they come from. I think with platforms like TikTok, it's so fun to watch how a video of somebody's mom that they took secretly where she's saying something silly, how that sound bit can be repurposed and reused in dramatic ways or funny ways or across different disciplines, and it could just skyrocket, like, or how viral dance trends come about. Like, I'm fascinated by just how people interact with content and the creativity behind it. I think that especially with TikTok, we're able to see how, like, people just get so creative and things
Yeah,
move,
that is true.
yeah, so
That is true.
quickly. It's like, you can, which is why I'm always on my phone or watching stuff, because in a turn of 2 days, a day, a trend can be quote unquote old now. And so it's like, I'm I'm so intrigued by just the evolution of social media and how it has evolved and how quick it is, and how everyone is jumping on. I'm seeing, even, like, I'm seeing my parents on social media more. I'm seeing people's parents on TikTok, and they're duetting their children on the app. And I'm seeing people of all ages across
Yeah,
all disciplines.
that's true.
Uh,
That's true. Social media has opened it up for a platform where, people from all different walks of life,
mhm.
are all accessing and kind of like putting themselves out there without putting themselves out there. Like sometimes facial, being in front of somebody and doing that type of content is totally different from you just putting it on your phone and kind of putting it up there, and hopefully, someone sees it, people like it, comment, share the good things. I know that with the social media lifestyle, like, I know it's very hard to kind of constantly keep on creating after creating after creating. Like, could you talk a little bit more about that for the listeners? Because I know that sometimes, they might catch these roadblocks when it comes to content. Like, how do you work past that and create authentic stuff every single time? Like, that seems a lot of like pressure.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, I would say that the key is to just make stuff that makes you happy. And so, not forcing it. It's like, I think people can sniff out when people are making content that doesn't resonate with them. Like, I think, like, the content that people are drawn to are ones where it's not overly scripted. It's so real, whether that is, an off the cuff embarrassing moment, maybe it's a funny moment, or maybe it's just a moment where they're just straight up crying to the camera and they're sharing their experiences, and they're real and they're vulnerable. I think because of the vast amount of content that's out there now, um and people really showing up online, I think people can sniff out if people are being real or if they're not, which is why I think that more brands are moving towards custom content marketing versus traditional, paid advertising, where it's just a commercial, overly branded, and it doesn't relate to whatever's being shown. So I think that
Mm,
that is the key. It's really just making stuff that you're excited about, and that tells more of a story about you versus what you think the audience wants to see, or um what you think you should be. I think you should just kind of make stuff that shows your personality. I am not super active on my own socials, but when I do, it's very, I make sure it's very much myself. I don't I don't make it anything I'm not. I mean, I would say any of my friends that follow me on social know that what I'm putting on social is exactly
yeah,
exactly what I am.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's
you know,
it.
so I think that's the key. I that's just be real, be authentic, and when you're not, the audience can sniff that out. So be prepared for it.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because you are right. I see a lot of the things that do, have millions and millions of views is just literally something that we all could do in our house, you know, versus the individual like really trying to think about what they want to put out. You could tell like the difference. Obviously, it's both shot off of the phone, but like, just something very organic. People, walking into a door and, all of a sudden a bucket of ice water falls on them, and then that's it. You got 5.6 million views, and you're like, what? It was just water and ice. But that's what the viewers wanted to see. That's what that's what is probably trending at that time. Who knows?
Yeah.
So I get you on that. Like certain trends, they're there for a couple of days, gone for a week, that kind of stuff. Now, one of our previous guests had talked about in something a little bit deeper. I know you talked about you're happier where you are and you definitely feel empowered. And I want to kind of go back to that. The guest had mentioned about like how hard it was for them to kind of find their voice in that corporate setting. You know, how do you speak your mind at work and not overthink it? Like, and how do you feel people receive you in your position?
That's a good question. I would say that I'm still actively learning that. I'm still actively trying to find my voice in a corporate setting, but yeah, I think the struggle is I think that kind of goes back to being one of the few that looks like me in the room. You know, it's a little bit intimidating. I think earlier on in my career, I was definitely quieter, and I used to tell myself, you know, you're early in your career, like your insight is not as valuable. You're going to say the wrong thing. That was what my inner voice was telling me early on in my career. And it wasn't until I found, you know, the types of mentors that I did, where I remember one of my first few mentors um called me out for apologizing too much. She was like, you apologize a lot. And she was like, and you know, this is a very male dominated industry. And she was like, and women are very commonly known to over apologize and make concessions. And some people view that in the corporate world as, you know, a weakness, or you'll get you're like a people pleaser and you'll get pushed over. And she's like,
Mm,
no, that's not who you are. And so she would call me out on it, like in meetings. If I would say it, she would look at me, or like we in our one-on-one, she'd debrief it with me. And instead I switched my language to, instead of, oh, I'm sorry, I'd be like, thank you. So instead of sorry for being late, thank you for your patience. And so
mm,
I learned to find my voice through mentors in little ways like that. So, you know,
mm,
as I was getting out of the role of being a people pleaser and dimming my voice because I felt like I wasn't qualified enough, I just started being more of myself. And I think who I am outside of work is very outspoken, very opinionated, and you know, is not shy of the spotlight. So now I just remind myself, be who you are.
true.
That's who's outside, you know, be who I am in the outside world and bring that into the corporate world. Cause at the end of the day, that's why they hired me. I showed my personality in the interview. They know exactly who I am. And so now I just remind myself that they hired me for this. Like my
Hmm, hmm,
one of the reasons why they hired me. And then, you know, sometimes you still get in your head, but I think it's part of it is like I like leaning on your colleagues and people that really do know you, and for them to advocate for you. So I was very clear with my boss when I first started at this job. I was like, these are the things that frustrate me, these are the things that motivate me. This is who I am. Like when I'm being quiet, this is like, I don't want to be misunderstood. This is where I'm coming from. So I laid it out. I was very communicative, I would say, maybe overly communicative with him.
hmm,
That was
hmm,
because I wanted to make sure that I set myself up for success in this new role, where I was able to really speak my mind and say what I was feeling. So I think
hmm.
that came from a lot of mentorship, a lot of support from my community, and just a lot of self reminders that I need to just bring my personality, and this is my
Hmm.
personality.
No, I really like how you said the whole thing about like they hired you for that, right? You know, to have a voice. Like, why are you not utilizing it while you're there? I think that's where, um, you know, a lot of listeners, you know, listening could kind of really grab that line right there because they hired you for a reason, you know, and obviously in your interview, you know, they saw your personality. So if that's what your personality consists of, then obviously speaking up when needed is obviously essential. Now, I know that you're very passionate about issues impacting the AAPI community. You know, what are some of these issues and like what is it like?
I think a lot of it is just making sure that I am a voice in
Hmm,
community in whatever space I'm taking up. And so, you know, whether it's at work and we're talking about inclusivity and like um who we're trying to target, whether it's like, when we're looking at audience insights, when we're looking at, when we're exploring content around AAPI month, making sure that, when brands are looking at activating around AAPI month, that I'm there asking the questions of, okay, what is this brand doing outside of this piece of content? Like what is this brand, what is this brand's missions? Where else is this brand playing? Which AAPI creators are they uplifting outside of AAPI month? So I think that's kind of how I represent the AAPI community in the spaces that I take up. And that is just making sure that, whatever I'm doing, whether it's content or even, in employee groups where, we're talking about diversity and inclusion, that I am speaking up and sharing my experience as a Filipino American, which is, I would love to see more Filipino Americans in this industry and in content marketing, and along my side, that would be great. And I think a lot of it too is making sure that I am, like when I have people from my hometown or other API folks either on LinkedIn or even just personally reach out, and they're like, how do you get there? I think a lot of my duty now too is to pay it back. Like it's to help mentor people that are maybe fresh out of college that want to be in this industry,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so that we can make sure that more of us show up.
That's
Which is
true. That's true. That's true. And you are paving the way. And I know that definitely is challenging. And I know obviously you obviously have your good days and your bad days with it, but you are definitely utilizing your voice for the right reasons. And I feel like, having someone like yourself in the forefront, especially at these larger companies and agencies, working with them, it definitely opens up the door for a lot more of the other individuals. Now, before we kind of like conclude on our interview, I want to kind of talk about a little bit of the some challenges at work. Sometimes we don't know how to overcome them. And I want to kind of know about some of those challenges that you've kind of faced, and like what got you through it.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like I had a challenge a couple weeks ago where I just felt like it was just one of those days where I felt like I was doing everything wrong. I felt like everything that I was, putting forth, there was like issues with everything I was putting forth. And maybe it was in my head, maybe it wasn't, but I just felt like I was not living up to, like I wasn't putting out work that I was super proud about. And I remember I just had a day where I just kind of broke down and I just started crying. And I was like, I'm a fraud, I'm an imposter. They hired the wrong person. And, I
Wow.
was just telling myself all of these things in my head, which I'm now realizing was, that that was who I was battling between me and my head. But I would say how I overcame it, and I think is really the through line with this interview, was that I really just leaned on my community. I think who I am would be nothing without my community. And I think that when I did have that day, I was around people, even at work. Like my bosses and my colleagues were telling me, it wasn't a glass ball that I dropped. It's fine. Like nobody else was putting that pressure on me but me. And then, the people around me personally were also making sure that that I was reminded of what I was thinking was purely me against me, and that I was fully capable, and that, they hired me for so and so reasons, and that I was absolutely capable and empowered to step up to the role. And it was just one bad day. Um, so I would say with any challenge, I really just lean on my community. And I'm so lucky to be surrounded by a group of folks that is so aligned with my personal values and knows who I am and who I want to be as a leader, as also a friend and a person. And so I'm held accountable. Like when I do have moments like that, my community holds me accountable to who I am and who I said I'll be, and then I just live up to it. And with their support. So I would say whenever I have a challenge, I just voice out that I need help. and
Yeah,
they
you got to
help.
ask. That was something one of the last guests said about is asking for help. Like that's one of the things that have helped them incline up the ladder was not being afraid to ask for help. I think that's essential. We closed mouths don't get fed, especially when you're climbing that corporate ladder. Now, my last question to you is that most people from the outside, looking in, are always going to be like, social media, it's fun, it's entertainment. What are some of the qualities, things that any of our listeners who's looking to pursue this career in their line of business, like what are some of the qualities you feel like they should have?
Yeah, good question. I would say, I think it goes along with any other job. It requires I think a lot of jobs require just a high level of project management skills and and I think that really helps one articulate the types of content that you're trying to pitch. And I think a lot of people just think, oh yeah, we're talking about content, we're doing all of this, but it's like, how are you portraying this to the client and to partners? And a lot of the job is being able to properly articulate it, whether it's through decks or email. So having those skills of so I think like if you do want to cross over industries, I think it's totally doable. I think it's just a matter of sharpening just general skills of like project management. I think corporate etiquette and all of that is stuff that you kind of learn when you're in it. But all of the things that, people might not view as glamorous as talking about content, still very much needed in a place like this. Like I know like at the end of the day when I'm talking about content, I need to pay it back to business objectives and like how does it play into the bigger business goals, and being able to articulate that and look at the bigger picture. All of these things I think are useful in this industry, but then also like finding that fine balance of like being able to execute it really well, but then also being able to relay it as fun. Like it is fun content. It is like what
Yeah.
we're doing is really cool. So part of it is finding that fine balance of like execute it really well and be
Okay.
a project manager, but then also have fun with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you on social media, you gotta have fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't take things personal. You gotta, you can't take it too serious. Like you said, being very organic and authentic obviously will help in selling yourself on those platforms. And Allison, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for like kind of just giving us an insight on yourself, your culture, your background, where you're from, and also just giving us a great insight on like just content in general. I feel like that is a very big thing that as people grow in this industry, whether what industry that they're in, you can't run away from it. Social media will always seem to be a growing force to reckon with. And I feel like, as long as you're selling something, like you said, you just gave us some key information. You said a lot of these big corporations now, big businesses are the big brands are looking to kind of get into more of that type of marketing. So if they're doing it, and they're kind of making that shift, the individuals who have access to it every single day on their phone should definitely utilize it for the greater good. So Allison, thank you so much for sharing your time and just giving us your knowledge for today.
Oh, this was so much fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to let the listeners know, if you want to hear more inspirational stories like Allison, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect and follow our feed, Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you again, Allison.
Thanks.